on today's episode of Life Embodied.
I think what's missing in our modern world is we just see nature as a resource, and we're divorced from the actual relationships. And when we're divorced of relationships, we're divorced from meaning. And when things don't mean anything to us, we don't protect them. And if we don't protect them, then we're destroying things. And then we find ourselves in the position that the world is in right now.
Yeah.
And I think our work, at least my work, is to help give people tools to rebuild those relationships and rebuild meaning and, find little things that are worth protecting.
Welcome to Life Embodied, where we explore how an embodiment practice can support us in meeting the challenges of life. How can we surf the waves of life deeply anchored in the safety of our bodies? How can we learn to trust our capacity to be with intense sensations and emotions? How can we cultivate body awareness, and why does it matter? Episodes include interviews with experts and practitioners that bring their knowledge and passion and share practical tips for your everyday life. I am your host, Katharina Alf. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the conversation. Welcome, everybody, to today's episode. My guest is Kyle Koch. He used to work as an IT software technician before he quit his job in 2011 to go to the Wilderness Awareness School in Dewey, Washington, where, among other things, he learned survival skills and bushcraft, wildlife tracking, permaculture principles, and understanding the language of birds. He spent 8 years studying and working there. These days, Kyle is a coach at Evolve Move Play, founded by Rafe Kelly, who I interviewed in episode 3. If you haven't listened to that yet, go check it out. Kyle's mission is to recreate a sense of belonging through reconnection to nature, community, and self. And of course, he is a tree runner and nature parkour athlete. Welcome to the show, Kyle.
Great to be here today. I'm really excited to chat with you and to, hear kind of your curiosities and to share about my journey.
Yeah. Where are you at the moment? I saw you're like hanging out outside in the woods, probably.
Yeah, currently I am in Washington State, and I'm on the east side, the eastern slope of the Cascade Mountains, just outside of Cle Elum on the Yakima River.
Mm-hmm. What's it like there?
It is, it's really beautiful. All of the oxeye daisies and the tiger lilies are coming into full bloom. There are lots of baby birds and beautiful beetles, and the weather is starting to get hot. We still have some cool evenings, but feels like summer.
Yes, summer is here.
The long-awaited summertime.
Hell yeah. So, Kyle, I always ask my guests, what is it like being your body? What is the physical experience of being you that might be specifically today or in general? Could you let us in on that experience?
Yeah, what is it like to be in my body? Typically it's really fun and it feels like a sense of freedom. I really like falling and rolling around on the ground and running around in the dirt barefoot and kind of putting my body on the earth. And but I'm also in this like transition period where about 8 months ago, I suffered a significant injury to my ACL on my right knee. And there's been some fear that has been reintroduced into my body. And the last few months, especially as the injury is, subsided, I'm reacquainting myself with my body. So the freedom
Mm.
and movement that used to come really easy to me, there's a little bit of a hesitation, a little
Yeah.
noticing of, hey, we gotta rebuild some trust.
Hmm. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. I can relate.
Yeah, what injuries are you experiencing?
My lower back keeps I don't know communicating,
Mm,
but yeah, I mean, actually, that's a great entrance for our conversation because do you know when it got significantly better?
yeah, that's kind of this. It's I don't really there seems to be this ebb and flow of
Mm.
feeling really well, or there's certain movements that come really easy to me. And
Mhm.
with the fear and the not knowing, right? So, at the beginning there's huge sense of freedom. I'm doing 10-foot jumps, I'm running, climbing, flipping, I'm like learning all these new skills, and then like boom, roadblock all the way back to square one. I'm limping, I'm moving very slowly,
Mhm.
and I'm rebuilding these movements, similar to like a child. I'm like learning how to walk again. I'm learning how to jump again. And often I find myself in scenarios. So a moment that does stand out to me is I was up in British Columbia. I was doing some wildlife tracking with some friends, and they asked me if I could teach some parkour. And I'm like, whoa, I haven't done parkour in like 6 months.
Mhm.
And we found this really beautiful downed tree, a ponderosa pine that had fallen over, and it was perfect vault height, had all kinds of obstacles. And I started teaching parkour and seeing what movements I could do. And then we started playing games. And there's this interesting thing that happens when you play games. You throw all caution to the wind, and all of a sudden, winning the game becomes more important than any injury. And you find yourself doing things you hadn't planned on doing, you didn't know you could do, and that were very surprising to me.
Yeah.
And so I was reflecting after that. I was like, wow, like
Yeah.
I wasn't physically limited. I had been mentally limiting myself, um,
Yeah.
because the fear of injury was there. And then all of a sudden through that game, I realized I have a greater capacity for movement than I originally thought. And so that was like a little breakthrough moment.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was the same for me. I like a week ago, I went to the Evolve Move Play workshop in Copenhagen.
Oh, sweet. That's awesome.
Yeah, and for me that happened during roughhousing. I was so afraid that it would hurt my back, but
Mm,
during roughhousing, like it didn't even hold me back a bit. Like I was able to do everything, and afterwards my back was so much better. I said, okay, that's my medicine.
mm. Yeah, and that's so interesting, right? We self limit ourselves for whatever fears or insecurities that we have. And I think this is true in so many areas of our life. But through play, right? This, often thought as frivolous thing for adults, like so much is revealed in those moments. Like
Mm,
your experience, you found this medicine, you found this freedom, this like whole new boundary.
yeah. Yeah. So could you like broaden the lens again a little bit and like tell our listeners what it is that you do at Evolve Move Play? And I don't know, maybe even in other contexts. Like, what is this? I mean, the title is fantastic. I would say it's really evolve as a human being through moving in a playful way.
Mm, yeah, exactly. Like we as humans, and other mammals, we evolved to move. And the most nourishing form of movement is play, as we kind of both spoke to. So much was revealed to us about ourselves that we were, unaware of through play. And this is also how other mammals learn about their environment, right?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
baby tiger, monkeys, otters, beavers, you name it. They're learning about their body and how their body works with other bodies and how their body works in space through play and exploration, right? This I really like John Vervaeke has this idea of play is entering in to this imaginal realm where more things are possible, and you are
Mhm.
in that landscape. And then when you come back to what we think of as like the real physical world, we can bring back those insights and expand and make more real, right? To both realize, like have an insight, and to make more real our experience, right? You had a story about your back, you entered into this imaginal game where you're roughhousing, through a set of, arbitrary constraints and rules in order to participate with another body. And you had a realization about your body, how it works. And now you can bring that back, like you said, as medicine into your daily life. And now your life is a little bit more expanded.
Yeah.
and and that's really the work that we do is um we give people, really, and it's not just play for the sake of play, even though there is that, but
Mhm.
a play through a well designed game can help you achieve more specific goals, right?
Yeah.
Like a
Uh-huh.
game, there's a set of parameters, the game has to be engaging. um and it has to evolve, because as you learn how to play the game, you get good at it. And when you get too good at it, it becomes boring and you
Mhm.
get less nourishment from it. So, a lot of the work that we do is definitely centered around play and games. And we use it as a model to explore the deeper aspects of character cultivation and relationship with the human and non-human world.
Yeah.
Just like
Hmm.
children, like how do you engage with the non-human world, the more than human living world around us? If you imagine something like in a game, like you have to steal the meat from some leopards, now you're moving through the environment in a particular way. Certain affordances are now standing out to you in the landscape.
Mhm.
Things that might be obstacles are now things to hide behind or things to propel you.
Mhm.
And you're now interacting. People often are like, well, I don't know how to do parkour, I don't know what to do.
Mhm.
And using your imagination and playing an imaginal game like a child might do as an adult, you can do it with a little bit more specificity. Like, if I want to work on my ground movement, I can imaginally be an otter. I can imaginally be a cougar. And, you see this in Animal Flow, you see this in MoveNat, you see this in all of these other fitness routines and all
Mhm.
martial arts are based off of animals, and like yoga is based off of animals and based off of landscapes. And what do you do in a yoga pose, mountain pose? You are
Mhm.
imaginally being a mountain for the benefit of developing your body in a specific structure, right? That's a form of play.
Yeah. Sweet. Yeah, and then there's this like there's an aspect where the word becomes as if more tangible, or your relationship with it becomes more meaningful because you engage with it that way. Like, for example, if you play to be a bird, you'll gain insight about what it might be like to be a bird.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that a lot of people speak to in like acting, one of the skills that acting really helps you develop is empathy. A really
Hmm.
good actor is not just playing the character, right? We're using that word play. They're imaginally being as much as possible. They're putting themselves into a character in order to really feel into what does it feel like to be that person. And the more they can feel that, the better they can participate in that role, and then the more empathy they might have in general for those people. Well, we can do
Mm.
the same thing with animals and
Hmm.
birds. We can imaginally put ourselves into their way of life as much as we can. And so often people at the end of that game, they're like, oh wow, like I really more deeply understand what it is like to be a bird in this world by imaginally participating in their, what we see as their daily behaviors. And when
Yeah.
we have empathy for things, now we see a bird in our daily life and we're like, oh, wow, like I wonder what it's doing. I wonder if it has babies, if it's feeding, and
Hmm.
as we notice and get curious, we develop relationship. And that relationship, it can become meaningful. And we're like,
Yeah.
oh, that's not just a robin. That's the robin that is nested in the eave of my house. It has 3 babies. It's living out this beautiful life. I can't wait to see when the babies hatch from their nest. Now you
Mm.
have this relationship, right? And the more relationships we have with the world, so like again, if I climb trees and I find like, the trees that you went to were amazing, right? And you got to
Yeah.
play in those trees, and you developed a relationship with those trees. Different trees afforded you different style of movement, and now you're probably going to tell people stories of those trees, and you might revisit
Yeah.
those trees, and you have this relationship, and all of a sudden those trees are meaningful to you. And now if somebody were to go in and cut those trees down, hopefully that would impact you in a meaningful way. You would have, some sadness, some grief, some concern for this being that
Yeah.
you have relationship with, and that's,
Yeah.
I think, what's missing in our modern world is we just see nature as a resource, and we're divorced from the actual relationships. And when we're divorced from relationships, we're divorced from meaning. And when things don't mean anything to us, we don't protect them. And if we don't protect them, then we're destroying things, and then we find ourselves in the position that the world is in right now.
Yeah.
And I think our work, at least my work, is to help give people tools to rebuild those relationships and rebuild meaning and, find little things that are worth protecting.
Hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, and I noticed that through the through the bits of education I have so far in this realm, I'm really I'm I'm discovering it in the last month. Um, the things you talk about, because I was so busy in the last years with the internal world and making meaning of my personal narrative and my history and why am I the way I am and how can I change that and how can I improve it,
Mm,
which is all important for sure. It's not irrelevant, but it's just one bit of the whole picture. And I find it so rewarding to now really engage more with the world in real life and to create meaning through being in relationship. And just through the little bits that I understood so far, I like the world around me is changing. Like Rafe showed us those beech trees, and now I learned, okay, beech trees are super strong, and you can like they
mm.
welcome you to climb because they are so strong, they can carry you. And now all of a sudden, everywhere I see beech trees, and I try to climb them. Or and with the birds as well, I just recently witnessed how, because some birds were like they were calling out, and I was like, "What's going on? The birds are calling." And then
Mm.
several more birds came flying, and I was like, "What's going on?" And then I saw a magpie just robbed a baby out of a nest. And once the
Oh, no
magpie
way.
yeah, and once the magpie was gone with the baby, like all the birds flew away again and went back to normal in a way. But there was this moment of outrage and birds coming to the aid, but they were too late and the magpie had stolen the baby. And I was like, wow, I think like last year, I probably wouldn't have noticed because I wouldn't have been aware of the calling out of the birds. I wouldn't have paid attention to it.
Wow. Yeah. That's a beautiful and tragic story. But
Yeah,
that's
it's
like
tragic.
exactly but that's happening like all day, every day.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So two things on that. One, a Cooper's hawk, who's also a bird that eats other birds. Um, it takes 61, roughly about 61 baby birds to feed one juvenile Cooper's hawk.
Oh,
And they typically have
wow.
three babies. And so you can imagine that 180 baby birds are being eaten every month, right?
Oh, wow.
Um, And so that's the level of like awareness and drama and activity, that's happening in the forest.
Mm.
And that's why birds are so aware. And one thing I wanted to just add to what you spoke to is like, you were speaking to this internal work, and one thing about nature is it's actually the best mirror, right? So birds are reflecting back to you, and other animals as well, but especially the birds are reflecting back to you your internal state, right? So I'll use, here in America we have the American robin, right? So just like you said, magpies, crows, jays, ravens, squirrels, raccoons, Cooper's hawk, sharpshin hawk, weasels, long tail weasels, short tail weasels, all of those things are trying to kill the bird and its babies like pretty much all day, every day. Also, you could throw like cats and coyotes in there too,
Mhm.
right? That's a lot of things trying to eat you.
Yeah.
So you think about the level of awareness that a bird has to have.
Mhm.
And a bird has to be able to decipher between a hunting cat and a non-hunting cat, a hunting bird and a non-hunting bird.
Mhm.
right? Because it's an energy expenditure thing. So they can look at the posture, the body language of a cat, of a bird, of a weasel, and they can determine in a moment whether that creature is hunting or not hunting,
Mhm.
right? At the same, like, because animals are communicating with body language more so than anything.
Mhm.
And they're looking at you in the same way. You're right. So you have both your body language is a deeper reflection of your internal state, right?
Mhm.
And then you could also put that into like alpha, beta, gamma, theta waves that you're emitting from your heart and your brain.
Mhm.
And those are both your brain waves and your posture are both reflections of your internal state. And a robin is looking at you in an instant and it's determining, are you safe? Are you not safe?
Huh.
Right. And then
Yeah.
they're going to communicate to you. Like, first, they're just going to give you a flick of their tail. And if you're not paying attention, you won't notice that. And then it's going to, and then it might make a noise, it might not. And then eventually it'll make a noise and it'll fly up. And that was, again, another feedback. And if you still didn't if you still didn't notice the feedback you're getting from the environment, then the robin is just going to make a noise and it's going to fly in the opposite direction that you're coming.
Mhm.
You basically got 3 feedbacks like, hey, like, what are you doing?
Mhm.
Like, do you not care about me and my life? Clearly, no, you don't care about me. Whatever's going on for you is more important. And so just a real quick story on that. I was going out to my sit spot and I just got word that I did not get this job that I wanted.
Mhm.
And I was like super sad, frustrated, like, oh my, like, what am I gonna do with my life? I thought I was gonna get this job. So I go out to my sit spot and these robins that I've known for 9 months, I've watched them raise babies. I've seen them come and go. They're like plowing out away from me, like 50 yards away. They're just like bursting through the forest. I'm like, well, like, what's
Uh-huh.
going on? Clearly it's not me, it's them,
Hmm.
right? Like, what's wrong with them? I'm just, out here. And so I noticed that. And then the next day, I kind of like found peace in the, you know, future that was coming. And I woke up early. I had a nice breakfast. I did some movement and I'm like feeling a whole lot better. I'm like, I'm going to go out to my shit spot. As I'm walking out to my sit spot, same pathway, same robins, but now these robins, literally one of them almost flew into me. It like got about, less than a meter away from my face
Mhm.
and like panicked in the air and flew away. I was like, oh, well, that was interesting.
Mhm.
And then as I was leaving my sit spot, the same thing happened. It was as if I was invisible, like as
Wow.
if I belonged so much in the forest that my internal state was so at peace that these robins like flew at me as if I was a tree branch they were trying to land on.
Mm.
But at the last moment realized I was a human and that was not a good idea.
Wow, that's beautiful.
And so, yeah, just to recognize it's like, I think we should separate out things and we should work on our internal state and we should separately learn about the birds, but then we can recognize when those two things come together. And now I can notice my impact on the world. And then I can check in with myself about where I'm at. And then I can start to make causal reflections like, wow, like I just plowed through that robin.
Mm.
And like, where am I at right now? Like, oh yeah, like I'm anxious about this interview that I'm doing and I'm late and I have to get there. And that took priority around instead of caring about this bird. And I just, pushed right through it.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, okay. So that's the beautiful thing I like about nature is it's like, as I learn about nature, I learn about myself. As I learn about myself, I learn about nature. And there's that kind of like inter-affording, interpenetrating perspective.
Mhm. What is the sit spot practice about? Because that comes into play there too, right? And you mentioned your sit spot.
Yeah, sit spot is, it's the easiest thing, and at the same time, um, or what is it? It's the simplest thing, but it's not easy. I really like that saying. Like some things
Yeah,
are like really simple, but they're not easy.
yeah, for
Like
sure.
how do you stay healthy? It's like, well, you should probably eat good food. You should probably move your body, and you should probably have, wholesome relationships with your community. It's like, okay, well, that's pretty simple, but not so easily implemented.
Yeah.
And that's the simplicity of the sit spot. It's simply a spot that you go to often and sit. And when you're sitting there, your only task is to notice. Notice what you're noticing. Notice what you're not noticing. Notice where your curiosity is going, where your interest is going. Just to be there and to notice the world. Similar in meditation, often we're noticing our internal dialogue. Like I'm breathing, I notice a thought
Mhm.
comes up, I notice that I'm thinking, and now that I'm planning, and I let that go, and then I notice I'm breathing. Well, when you're at your sit spot, you bring that same noticing to the external world.
Mhm.
Like I'm noticing the shimmering green on these leaves.
Mhm.
I'm noticing the sound of that bird. And I notice that that sound elicits a feeling. And I notice these, what look like tracks on the ground. And as you start to notice things, you hopefully get curious. Like if you're noticing the sound of a bird, maybe you get curious and you're like, could I know what bird is making that sound?
Mm.
Could I know Once I know what bird, can I then know if that sound is a song or a call or an alarm? And then, so the sit spot is just this way of being, a place you go to learn about the world. And lots of times nothing happens at your sit spot.
Mm.
But sometimes you see a magpie steal a bird out of a nest and you learn, a lot about the world in that moment. And that's really what it is. It's a practice of learning about the world through observation. And so often you go to your sit spot, you go to the same spot, you go there different times of day, different times of year, and you notice how that spot is changing and evolving and shifting, and what new plants are growing, what birds are there, what birds are not there. When did the robin leave?
Mhm.
Like here, like a lot of our robins go down to Costa Rica
Oh, really?
for the winter.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And like hummingbirds fly across the Gulf of Mexico, and these birds make these massive migrations. So it's like, for me, like I know it's summertime because the Swainson's thrushes have arrived and they're singing beautifully into the night.
Yes. Here it's the swallow.
Oh, nice.
When the swallows are flying. Just a few weeks ago, I heard the first like pew. And I was like, oh, the swallows are back.
Yeah, and that like right, that's so beautiful and
It is, yeah.
meaningful and
Yeah.
interesting, and it marks a transition.
Yeah.
Like often, you know, in our modern world, we just go throughout our life, and maybe it's hot one day and maybe it's cold and maybe it's raining. We just kind of are like out of sync with the seasons.
Mm.
And again, this when we're out of sync with the rhythm of the world, like it's easy to feel like we don't belong.
Yeah.
And when we feel like we don't belong, we don't care, we're not interested. And again, it's just another symptom of, it's another way in which we're out of relationship with the world, and like why our problems are exacerbating like so quickly, right? It's like
Mhm.
I walk my land every day. I know every new track that I know, like, oh, there's a fresh turkey poop here. And I know that because I walked this yesterday and this poop was not here. And so I know there are turkeys around. And when the turkeys stop being around, I'm going to know. And I can
Yeah.
get curious about why they're not around. And if I notice that they're being hunted or poisoned or, whatever, I'm starting to be aware of the subtle changes that are happening in my environment, and I can make action. I can participate in that relationship
Mhm.
versus in our kind of modern world, all of a sudden, something is clear cut. All of a sudden, there's a new like Walmart where there used to be a forest. All of a sudden the water is poisoned and, the plants are dying, right? It's like all of a sudden,
Mhm.
but if you're in relationship and you're paying attention, you realize that a lot of these things like happen slowly, and you can notice them if you choose to pay attention.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're in a way intimate with what you're paying attention to, right? Like there has to be some kind
Mhm.
of knowledge or experience with it in order to be able to read what it is you're perceiving, to make meaning from the things you perceive.
Exactly. And that's, it's really key. Like, I think, I kind of have a very low bar. I'm just like, all right, like, let's start with noticing.
Yeah.
What can we notice? And then the more we can notice, then we can follow our curiosity, and we can get curious in this way that we can also then start to make predictions.
Hmm.
But we have to be mindful that our predictions can be wrong, right? and and that's what I really appreciate about nature is often there are shorter feedback loops. You're like, oh, this tree looks strong. I wonder, like, this seems like a strong tree. And then you go hang out on the branch and you're like, well, the branch broke. Maybe it's not a strong tree. And you're like, well, maybe I was too far out on the branch and the leverage of my weight is actually what broke the tree. Right.
Hmm.
So you have to be in this constant, like, in the nature perspective, which is almost opposite of our kind of like modernity perspective, is we live in the like what John calls the propositional tyranny, where if I want to know something, I want to be right about something, I can just look it up on the internet.
Hmm.
And then I'm like, like, what is this thing? Well, I look it up on the internet. Now I know what that thing is. And
Hmm.
now I'm in the position of being right and knowing. Well, in nature, you're constantly in the position of never knowing and like always being humbled,
Hmm.
right? You're like, oh, I think this is that bird. I think this is a song. And you might be like right for a time, like, yes, it is that bird and it is a song, but then you might find out that that song is actually being used as an alarm.
Mhm.
And so you are, as you're in this relationship, you're making predictions, you're getting feedback, you're updating your prediction, and you're in that realm of probabilities. Like, okay, the
Yeah.
probability of this being this is 80%, but it's never 100. And so you're in this state of humility and curiosity. You're not in this like, I'm right, you're wrong, and this is why.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, I hear what you're saying, and I can understand why you think that that is the way, but this is my perspective and how I view things.
Mhm.
And so it opens you up to this bigger picture of learning. So it's like all these things that you learn in nature, you bring to the more modern plastic world, and it allows you to cultivate these aspects of your character that allow you a little bit more ease in your relationships. Like, oh, like I thought this, and that is no longer true.
Yeah. So it's really when you practice it, it will inform you about your surrounding, about your environment, about nature, and you will learn to care about what it is that you witness day in, day out throughout the seasons. But not only this, and this is already huge. I mean, imagine everybody doing this, like we would take so much more care.
Mm,
But it's not only this, we can even then translate it into other relationships, for example, with other human beings, where we pay attention to them in the same way and allow to be constantly amazed by how things change. Right? This is what you're saying.
yeah, exactly. And I would say it can cultivate care. I always hesitate, like, this will do
Mm.
this. Like, maybe. And I mean, like, that's the intention and that's the hope of some of these things. But you could also like just bring your phone with you to your sit spot and like be on social media, for that time.
Yeah, or you could
Like,
or you could pay attention and become better at exploiting your surrounding, right? Like it's really a
yeah.
question of intention. Like, what do I intend to do with the knowledge that I gain or with the insight that I gain? I can use it in whatever way, and that's a decision.
Yeah. And I think that's important too. And that's what I like about Evolve Move Play. One of the ideas that we have is you have an ecology of practices. And what I mean by that is a forest is is an ecology. And what that means is there are things both affording and constraining each other, right? So a tree doesn't exist on its own. A tree exists in an ecology. There are bacteria and funguses and nematodes that are feeding it in the soil, and there's minerals from ancient volcanoes, and there's birds that are nesting and bugs that are eating, and the sunlight that that tree gets. So there's all of these forms of nourishment, like things that are adding to it, and then there are things that are constraining it. Like another tree might be shading out one side of the tree, so that tree is not growing as much on that side, or there might not be enough water at a particular time of the year, so the tree is growing slower at that time of the year.
Hmm.
Or it's feeding these animals but not these animals. And so if we think about our our life in that way, like, how do we grow, how do we nourish ourselves? We need a variety of practices, because any one practice on its own can lead to stagnation and kind of like a dogmatic rigidity.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, I only, you know, breathe. All I do is breathe. I get everything from breath. Breath work is the key. How do you get fit? Breathe. How do you lose weight? Breathe. How do you work on your internal landscape? Breathe. How do you cultivate relationships in your community? It's just all about breath work. And they're like, cool. Like you might, in some sense that's true. And you might gain a lot from that. But it's also a very narrow view. And
Yeah.
so we look at all of these different practices that are essentially a series of checks and balances. It's like, okay, you have cultivated mindfulness through a meditative practice. You've cultivated like an awareness of your internal landscape, but now in your community practice, you're triggered by somebody in your community and you're yelling and lashing out at them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, where is your awareness of your internal landscape? Where is your story kind of check? Like, where is this, peacefulness and
Mm-hmm.
empathy,
Mm-hmm.
that you've cultivated? That's not showing up here.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's why we have, nature connection practices cultivate these things, and parkour and movement practices cultivate these things, and they all interafford each other as well as they can strain and inform each other as well. Where it's like, okay, like I I can't do this. I need to work on this other thing. Or because I'm working on this other thing, I can't work on this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, similar to what you were saying, well, I'm working on my internal landscape and I've cultivated that. And now I'm working on bird language. Well, now they can interpenetrate and interafford each other, and I can be aware of them, but they might also reach a plateau where actually I need to learn more about the specific kinds of birds. Like, okay, there's like 20 different kinds of swallows,
Mm.
right? Okay, well, I need to go a little bit further into my internal practice, and I need to uncover some of these traumatic blocks that are preventing me from really being in touch with my emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And so really how that's really what I appreciate about Rafe's work, and why we had such synergy is I really brought in the nature connection practices into the movement practices that he was thinking really deeply about.
Mm.
And then with the work of John Vervaeke, we were both able to mold those into both mindfulness and meditation practices and contemplation practices and dialogical practices. And then all of those need to exist in a community,
Yeah.
not just of people,
Yeah.
but in a landscape. And then in a landscape that's full of more than humans. And those are letting us know like how we're right, giving us feedback. And so I think that's really important. And what I really appreciate about our work is kind of the breadth and depth of those things and those feedback systems.
Yeah. Absolutely. It really is so exciting. I'm so thrilled I found you guys. Because I think what you just mentioned about like the like narrowing onto one practice, I think I witnessed this quite often, definitely in myself, but also in other people, like this tendency to be obsessed with this one new thing that you discovered, and then you want to apply it to everything, and like you got this new hammer, suddenly everything's a nail, let's smash the hell out of everything.
Mm,
And then at some point it doesn't work, because the object, like the thing you encounter, is just too different. You simply cannot use that hammer on it. And then the tendency would be to like, ah shit, I think hammers are not it. Let's get rid of the hammer. Let's find a new tool. Oh, it's screwdrivers.
Mm.
Everybody, screwdrivers. It's screwdrivers, Especially if you're like a bit extroverted like I am, you walk around preaching the new tool you found when actually
For
like
sure.
for many, many things, the hammer is wonderful, but just not for everything. And just like, get a couple of more tools into the toolbox and know when to use what and what it does. And yeah, you'll get a lot further probably.
Yeah, but I do really love I'm similar, but I think the excitement around something is valuable,
Yeah.
because it propels you into that thing.
Mm.
And I think, again, kind of stepping back into like the probability scenario, it's like, what's the probability that I can hammer this? And it's like, well, and then having the humility and the awareness of the feedback of like, well, I'm trying to hammer this thing and it's not working,
Yeah.
but I can hammer these things. These things typically wouldn't. People don't think of this as hammerable, but I found out that it actually is.
Yeah.
And And so I think when you enter into it with like, I don't want to diminish the excitement, because I think that's where you get rapid growth and you really, focus and dive.
Mm.
But then at the same time, you have the humility of like, when things don't work, you're like, oh, I tried hammering this. It didn't work. Okay. Like, that's interesting. It's
Yeah.
not good or bad. It's not that hammers are no longer useful. It's like, this thing is not hammerable. I wonder what might be. Or like, I actually had a situation. I was using a screw gun to put in screws, but I missed the board underneath and I couldn't get the screw out with the screw gun. But if I took a hammer and I pried up a little bit and then used the screw gun, the screw would come out. So, and that's how I think about like nature connection in the city is like, I see way more wildlife. I see way more birds, and I see so many more forageable foods
Mm.
in the city. I experience so much bird language in the city,
Mhm.
right? I'm like taking all these, I actually intentionally moved into Seattle where I lived for 4 years to see if I could use these nature connection practices in the city.
Mhm.
Right. I was like, intentionally, like, I'm going to do this thing and see what happens. And I gained so much valuable insight, and I found where it does work, where it doesn't work as well. Right. I was able to like really get a broader scope of this nature connection tool and how I can apply it, and where it does not apply to these specific environments.
Yeah.
And I
Mm.
think, yeah, like, I just think that's a good way of looking at all these other things. Like, okay, like, do I only do yoga in a yoga room or on a yoga mat?
Mhm.
Or can I do yoga on a seat in the airplane?
Mhm.
Can I work on my posture and my breath and my awareness? Can I do nature connection practices out the window of an airplane?
Mhm.
Like, so I think there is that usefulness in the excitement of applying things outside of the context,
Mhm.
but having the awareness of when it works and when it doesn't work, or how well it works or how well it doesn't work. And I think that's super valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Thanks for protecting the excitement.
Oh, I love it. I'm that person too. So I want to be like, you guys,
Yeah.
like, I got super excited about a plant that I never have harvested. I've never eaten it. I like couldn't really even find it, but I was so stoked about it. I was telling everybody about it. I'm like, oh my God. And then it just like permeated my awareness in a way that people like they would tell me when they found it, and then I started to find it in landscapes and environments I didn't expect to find it. It was just like that excitement. Um, and even the excitement of being wrong. So I was up in Canada, again, wildlife tracking, and there was this plant, and my friend was like, "Oh, this is chocolate lily. Like the bulbs are edible. We're gonna do a big harvest." And I was like, "Oh, cool." So I was looking it up one day, and I found another plant called northern rice root, and it looked very similar to the chocolate lily, but it had just a couple different distinctions. And some of the specimens that I was finding in the field looked so much like this northern rice root. And I come up to my friend and I'm like, dude, I don't think that's chocolate lily. I think it's northern rice root. She's like, really? I don't know. And we got into this huge debate about it. And we actually presented, we were teaching a class about nature. And so I was like so boldly willing to be wrong that I took on the task of I'm going to create a proposal and prove and make an argument why this plant is northern rice root. And then she's going to make a proposal and an argument why it's chocolate lily. And so we both presented our proposals to the group, and I was very much wrong. I wasn't even like, I was so wrong. But in that willingness, we both and all of our students, we learned so much about both of those plants that immediately upon returning to my home in Washington, all of a sudden I saw chocolate lilies everywhere. And I had been here for a whole year and I never noticed them before.
Because now you really knew.
I really knew what they were and I really knew what they weren't.
Yeah.
And then again, this other plant, it looked like northern rice root, and I was just waiting for the flowers to go. And it turned out that it was a tiger lily. And now I know tiger lilies so well. So by like this boldly excitement about something and this deep willingness to be wrong, I've now increased my knowledge and my relationship with 3 different plant species, all of which I could harvest and eat.
Oh, yeah, the willingness to be wrong, I think that's an important bit. Because excitement combined with the need to be right can be a pain in the A.
Yeah, then it becomes like pushy, versus like this was fun and funny and engaging for all the students and ourselves. And it went on for like a week. It was like a whole thing. It became an inside joke. And so I just think approaching any of these practices, any of these ways of being with both like deep excitement, curiosity, as well as the humility, and the willingness to just be like, you know what? Like, I really thought it was this, and here's all my reasons, and I'm wrong.
Yeah. It's very inspiring.
And I think that's like a good way to like engage with new things. Like, oh, you're excited about this? Like, cool. Like, let's try it with you. Like, let's all jump in I heard cold water is great. Like, let's all do it together. And then you're like, maybe that's not for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you can even drop stuff quicker, right? When you're willing to be wrong about it, you can just be like, oh, okay, I was wrong. Like it's
And that's like with nature, like you're often wrong, or you're like right for a time. Like, yes, this is true. And there often becomes a point where that is no longer true, or it's not that true. It's like, yeah, like coyote tracks have 4 toes and claws, and this track has 4 toes and claws, and it's a diamond shape, but the size is off for this ecological region, and the coyotes are bigger here, and actually it's a wolf.
Mm-hmm.
But in any other context in a different part of the world, it's like your logic and your thinking is both true and right, but the same logic and same thinking can be true in another context, but you could be wrong.
Yeah.
And like nature is constantly like keeping you on your toes.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like in our modern world, we're like, oh no, I'm right. And I'm forever right.
Yeah. I actually had this with the magpie story. I had it with a friend because I told them, like, yeah, and I saw this magpie rob the baby bird. And then he was like, yeah, I don't think magpies rob baby birds. And I mean, he was bad educated in that case. Even Wikipedia knows that the magpies do rob baby birds. But I was like, what the fuck, dude? I saw it. I
Like,
witnessed it
do you,
happening.
yeah. And that's like, oh, it's so curious how that, you know, that's, what do you call that? It's like people are so convinced of their own perspective.
Yeah.
Even when you saw something, you experienced it, there's literature that supports that. Like, yeah, what is that unwillingness, to be like more curious? Like, oh, you saw a magpie
Mm.
rob a baby bird? Like, what'd you see?
Yeah.
Like, what color was it?
Yeah.
How do you know it was a magpie?
Yeah.
Like, how do you know it was a baby bird?
Yeah.
Like, was it, a mouse? Could it have looked like a baby bird?
Yeah.
And I think through that curiosity, you both would have learned, so much more about your experience.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big things that we bring into our practice at Evolve Move Play is dialoguing. Like, we do a bunch of activities and then we dialogue about it, right? And we're like, how was that?
Mm.
What did you learn from that? How does that apply to your life? What could you have done differently?
Mm-hmm.
And you can also get feedback from your partner. You're like, hey, I noticed, you were a little bit rigid and kind of standoffish in this exercise. Like, is that true? And they might be like, no. And you're like, oh, okay. Right. So
Yeah.
I think that dialogue and openness is part of our practice. Then that comes into our lives. And then we're having conversations with people like, hey, I saw a ghost. Instead of being like, no, you didn't. You're like, well, tell me more. Like, I saw a UFO. Like, okay, like, well, can you tell me more? Like, and the same thing in tracking, we're both like making a case for why we think it's something. And then we also will make a similar case for why it's not that.
Mm-hmm.
Or like, what else could it be? Like, oh, you saw a UFO? You thought I was tense? Like, what was giving you that impression?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, I noticed this and that. And you're like, oh, yeah, actually, when you did that thing around my knee and that's my injured knee, I did tense up a little bit. But
Mm-hmm.
other than that, I was perfectly happy,
Mm-hmm.
with the experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, stemming from a movement practice into a nature connection practice, then that penetrates into our openness in our just daily life when people are like, hey, I saw or had this thing, you can approach it with that curiosity.
Yeah. What I experience in like the immersion into nature and the paying attention to nature and what is going on, that it's a very down to earth, embodied relationship to spirituality as well, or a door into spirituality. And in this case, with spirituality, I mean like a felt sense of belonging and interconnectedness, like really a physical experience of this being true, that I am connected to everything, that I am part of everything, and I think by paying attention to nature, we can, like, there is no doubt that we are part of things.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, you know, like even if you go all the way, like in the end, if you die, you will go back to nature.
Well, hopefully. I mean, unfortunately, we put people in boxes full of chemicals that really don't go back to
That's
nature.
true. But if you would let your corpse do its thing, it would go back to nature.
For sure. Yeah. Was there, I mean, I agree with you. Do you have is there a question in there, or I'm
Uh,
just like, yep. Yep. Yes.
that's true. Yeah, maybe the question is there, like, you practiced this through your sit spot practice, I guess, by paying attention to nature, you kind of immediately pay attention to this as well. But is there other, or how do you practice this, or how is this relevant for your ecology of practices, like the spirituality part, to connect like to a bigger context?
Yeah. I mean, I'll kind of just reframe what you said, but I think you said it. When you, well, I'll put it in the frame of tracking.
Mm-hmm.
So tracking is essentially paying attention to events and putting those events into a pattern, and then trying to figure out if that pattern is true. What is that pattern causal? Is it corollary? Why am I seeing this pattern? And so, right, you look at the earth and you see some indents in the earth. Okay. And then you start to ask, how did those indents get there? And you see that there are 4 different indents that kind of look like circles, and you see one that kind of looks like a triangle. And so you're taking these individual indents and you're putting them into a pattern. Well, those 4 circles and triangle, that creates a shape that very much looks like a coyote's footprint.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then you're like, you look at a coyote's footprint or a coyote's foot, and you determine that it's very causal that that foot made that indent. And we can call that indent a track, a
Mm-hmm.
track on the landscape. And an impact was made. A disturbance and action did this, right? This foot touched here and left this mark. So we now have a causal pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can look out and we can see all of these tracks. And we can see that all of these tracks are having different forms of impact, right? Maybe the coyote ran really fast through some muddy grass and tore up that grass. That grass is now going to die.
Mm-hmm.
So we see this pattern, we see the impact, and we now know what's happening. Well, when we kind of keep broadening that perspective, we realize that everything is having an impact. Every single thing that we do, every action that we take is having an impact. And the more it's just like a really good tracker can see that, right? Like Sherlock Holmes, they'll look at you and they'll be like, oh, I see that you're limping, and that limp was caused by an accident, and you have a stain on your shirt, and it looks like you tried to wash out that stain, but it didn't go away. And that stain looks like it's 2 weeks old. It looks like 2 weeks ago you had a hot dog, you probably had a baseball game, right? So we're all of these things are having impacts, right? You can look at somebody's car, and the car tells a story about how that person is using the car, whether there's a scratch, whether there's a dent, whether it's clean or dusty, maybe there's a bird poop, right? So everything is a track,
Mm.
and a track is a causal relationship. Something did something to leave that track. And those causal relationships can create patterns that can be interpreted. And once we have a pattern, we can start to play the probability game, and we can start to make predictions about how things are happening, might happen, or have had happen. And as we keep kind of broadening this lens, we realize that everything is connected, right? That the wind brings the sand of the Sahara Desert across the Atlantic Ocean, creates a hurricane that uplifts through the Gulf of Mexico, that causes it to rain. And, every footstep is breaking down organic matter that is feeding the mycelial web and is determining the growth of plants, which is determining the insect activity, which is determining the bird or the amphibian activity. So we start to become aware of our impact. And once we become aware of our impact, we can start to have choice,
Mhm.
and we can decide how our actions are impacting the world. And we become in this greater connectedness. Hopefully, again, I don't think this is a given. But as we become more aware of our impact, hopefully you want to have a better impact, and you start to, cultivate your character in a way that is more in line with the impact that you have in this. And I'm trying to like get to the spiritual realm, but it's just like as these patterns unfold, you start to make more holistic decisions,
Mm.
hopefully,
Mm.
that are in alignment with the world that you want to live in. And you see this interconnectedness. And so you see, your actions, you know, good or bad, positive or negative, however you frame it, you see it in the world.
Yeah.
You see the tree that you planted, 50 years ago, and you see the kids playing on it, and you like have this greater sense of more than you.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I'm trying to connect to the spirit, is just the sense that you are not like an autonomous, self-contained thing, and that what you do doesn't matter and it doesn't have impact, because whether you're aware of it or not, it does.
Yeah.
And I think I'll try to wrap that in just saying, like, the spiritual sense for me is I see the connectedness in my actions, and I see the greater impact in any action that I take. And I feel that sense of connectedness wherever I go.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's
Hopefully
amazing.
that made sense.
It absolutely does. Like what I really like so much about it is that it doesn't require any kind of belief or any kind of storytelling background, metaphors. It's just it's very real. You can, wherever you are, you can always decide to direct your attention at this fact that you are impacting the world while it is impacting you. And like what I find so satisfying in this is that it creates an experience of safety for me, because I feel like, yeah, I am woven into the world, even if maybe I feel lost, but I'm not. Never. Can't
Mm.
happen. And
Yeah, there's
yeah.
a really beautiful poem. um, but it's at the end of it is just like, stop, listen. The forest knows where you are. Let it find you.
Ah, that's beautiful.
And just that sense that you belong wherever you are,
Yeah.
right? Wherever you go, like, I really like the Alan Watts, like, you did not come into the world, you come from the world, right? You are made up of the water, the food, the air, you are made up of the landscape
Mm.
that you're participating in.
Mm.
And I just think that that's like really important to recognize that you belong. And if you feel like you belong, you have meaning. And if you have meaning, you care. And if you care, we can start to make better decisions,
Yeah.
and we see that and I think with tracking, we see that even small actions really still have an impact.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we don't have to, have millions of dollars. We don't have to make dramatic changes. Like when I go out into the woods, like, I see a bunch of trash. Like, that's the, dark side of awareness. Like, I see all the beauty
Mm.
and I notice all the tracks and all the birds and I see
Mm.
all the trash. And it's overwhelming to me to pick it all up.
Yeah.
Like, man, like, I don't have the time or carrying capacity to clean up all the trash here. And it would be really easy for me to say, since I can't clean it all up, I'm not going to clean any of it up.
Mm-hmm.
And what I decide to do is I decide to pick up at least one piece,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I know that that one piece removed from that environment has an impact, even if that impact is a lack of impact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that, through that lens, I see that my small actions are, and yeah, kind of just talking in circles there, but it's just like small actions have impact, and I can decide, on a daily basis to move towards a more beautiful world if that's what I truly want.
Mm. Whoa, I think that's an excellent uh, note to finish on.
Mm.
um, is there any important practical tips for listeners who want to go out now and practice sit spot meditation? Anything that we didn't touch on yet, maybe, that is important to do?
Yeah, for sure. I like to keep it just like stupid simple.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the best thing, everybody knows this. There's loads and loads of science that support this statement. Is the best thing you can do for your health and your relationship with the world is go outside.
Mm.
Like, step one, go outside. Like, that would be like the bare minimum. Spend as much time outside as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're outside and you don't know what to do, just notice things.
Mm.
Notice where your eyes want to go. Notice what your attention, where it goes. You don't even have to direct it. You can be like, ooh, shiny thing. Ooh, bird. Ooh, plant. Ooh, doesn't matter. Just go outside and to notice, and then to get curious about what you're noticing. I'd say, like, that's like the lowest bar that has massive impact. And then the other thing that I would add is I would say go outside, move your body, go outside, move your body, do it with other people.
Mm.
And I think that will dramatically have a positive impact on all aspects of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm consciously practicing the things you teach for what is it now? Like 3 months, maybe at most. And it has already quite dramatically changed my life.
Mm, thank you for sharing.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for the amazing work you do and for your time.
Yeah, so I super appreciate having this conversation through these dialogues. I love hearing your perspective and the way that you're looking at things and your nature stories, the magpie, that's so epic. You got to witness that. And yeah, to have the opportunity to attempt to articulate the way that I'm thinking about my life in the world, also as a form of getting feedback
Mm.
for me and where the holes in my thinking and
Mhm.
how can I upgrade and change that. And so I just really appreciate you, taking the time and offering this opportunity.
Yeah, my pleasure. So, where can people find you when they want to meet you, get to know you, learn from you, practice with you?
Yeah, so I'm located here in the United States of America, and I work with Rafe at Evolve Move Play, and we have lots of in-person retreats and workshops that are happening throughout the summer months. So you can go to evolvemoveplay.com. You can check me out. Trotting Sparrow is my Instagram handle, and yeah, we offer lots of opportunity to get outside and create fun, playful, meaningful experiences with other people in the wild, beautiful world that we live in.
Amazing. All right, Kyle, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody, so much for listening. I hope you are inspired to go outside and pay attention to this beautiful nature we live in, or the ugly city you live in, or whatever it is. Pay attention to the birds, pay attention to the trees, pay attention to the insects, the poops, the marks, the tracks, whatever you can find, and make meaning out of it. So I wish you a happy nature immersion and hopefully see you back in 2 weeks. Please like, follow, subscribe, share this podcast if you enjoy it. It means a lot. Bye.